So not all body fat is created equal. In this video, I'm going to help you understand some circumstances that can come about that can cause our body to store some fat that can be extremely harmful and has the ability to be connected to pretty much all the diseases that you don't want to sign up for. So this could be a complicated topic. We're going to go over some studies here, and I'll have links to all these studies in the description below if you want to dig a little bit further into these. But I want to try to explain this in a way that would make sense to a human. I find that most people are humans, so we're going to describe it in this way. So when we're understanding how these troubling fats can come about, we want to look at the subcutaneous fat storage, which is that fat storage right under our skin. And basically this fat is just storing excess energy for when we need it later. So what happens is these fat cells will go into hypertrophy. Well, they'll basically expand. As we get more fat storage in there, the cells will expand. But when they get to a certain point, if they continue to expand, then they can become damaged and cause trouble. So the body also has this hyperplasia move where it will cause more fat cells to be developed, and then we can store more fat there. The problem is, if somebody has an insulin resistance issue going on, it can kind of damage both of these pathways and restrict them from working correctly. And the crazy thing is that, insulin resistance most commonly comes about from somebody shoving too many carbs and processed sugars and junk into their gullet, and then that raises insulin too high, too often, and eventually the cells are like, I ain't listening to that anymore, and we become insulin resistant. So when we're looking at this insulin resistance, it has the ability to damage this, but also when these cells become too big, it has the ability to start creating inflammation that can actually magnify this insulin resistance. So it becomes this vicious cycle of going back and forth between, oh man, I got too much fat because I'm insulin resistant, and oh man, now my fat is actually causing more insulin resistance. So when these subcutaneous fat cells are maxed out, or when insulin resistance is resisting the ability for them to expand or multiply anymore, then that excess fat will get dumped into what's called visceral fat. And this is visceral fat that surrounds all of our organs here and surrounds the liver and the digestive system and the stomach and pancreas and everything. And this visceral fat has the ability to cause a lot of trouble. Now, this visceral fat is not as flexible as the subcutaneous fat. So it already is not very good at creating extra fat storage cells, and it's not as expansive as the subcutaneous fat, but insulin resistance can restrict this ability even further. Now when this visceral fat stores become packed, now we got real trouble. We'll look at this study here on ectopic fat and insulin resistance, and they say that when this visceral fat storage starts to become too full, this induces a redirection of lipids towards peripheral tissues, including skeletal muscle, liver, pancreas, and heart. And this is called ectopic fat deposition. And let's look at this study here on visceral adipose tissue, the hidden culprit for type 2 diabetes, and this study on features, functions, and associated diseases of visceral fat and ectopic fat. And these studies show us that this visceral and ectopic fat is associated with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, the big C word, even dementia, and a wide variety of other health issues. And when this fat starts to accumulate in the organs, then they don't work correctly, and we start to go downhill real fast. Just because this is metabolically active fat. It's putting out all of these inflammatory cytokines, and it's creating trouble. It's not just fat storage like this subcutaneous fat. It even has the ability to put out this aromatase enzyme that can change like testosterone into estrogen, which can even magnify fat storage around the belly and chest even more. Thanks so much for the man boobs. And other factors do have the ability to create this trouble. Things like sleep deprivation and stress causing cortisol to go way too high. Alcohol can be a very big issue. That's why you hear so many people, alcoholics, that are having fatty liver issues. Other things like fructose can be a big one. Look at this study on consuming fructose sweetened, not glucose sweetened beverages, increasing visceral adiposity and lipids. And it's not just like fructose in fruit that you're consuming. That's usually not going to be a problem. The problem comes from high fructose corn syrup that's pretty much in every food that we eat that's processed and we just buy from the grocery store. You can't even drive a Toyota Camry without having high fructose corn syrup in the ingredients of the production. So it's pretty much everywhere, and this fructose really has the ability to create a lot of trouble and really magnify all of this fat storage. Seed oils can also be problematic, and some of the studies that I linked below talk about a problem with saturated fat when it's combined with sugar. So if somebody's eating like a keto diet or a carnivore diet where they're consuming a lot of saturated fats, that's usually not going to be as problematic here because their body is operating a little bit differently in that circumstance. But when a normal person is consuming a lot of saturated fat with sugar and starch as well, it seems to have the ability to increase some of this visceral fat storage. And what's interesting is that a person can increase visceral fat without actually gaining weight. And they can also lose visceral fat without losing weight. So a person cannot even be overweight and can still have a lot of visceral fat and these fatty organ type issues. You'll hear this called skinny fat in a lot of circumstances. And in this case, there can also be problems with muscle tissue having a hard time rebuilding and repairing correctly, or it's being broken down because of malfunctions. We talk about that in our video on the real reason that you're skinny fat is not about your diet, and we'll have that linked in the description below when that comes out. And that's really for people that are really eating the right way, but they're still having some of these issues. But if you're eating all corn chips, then it really is about your diet. So we want to keep that in mind. But the real problem with these types of bad fats, with the visceral fat and the ectopic fat, is that the vicious cycle that they can create with the ability for them to create all of this inflammation, to disrupt our hormonal function, change the way that the body is operating, that basically ends up magnifying fat storage even more and magnifying the whole cycle again. So when we're looking at what do we want to target to fix this problem, so just remember, I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving anybody medical advice, I'm basically just a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't help me figure that out, I had to dig for my own answers. So now for 20 years, I've been teaching health professionals in more than 40 countries how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. But with these studies that I'm linking below, you can dig through those and find the right questions to ask your doctor. Well, I really like to see people work on this reducing the visceral fat, because when you can do that, you're also going to reduce this ectopic fat. And in order to reduce this visceral fat, a lot of it has to do with fixing the insulin resistance if that's going on, so that that subcutaneous fat can operate the right way. But there are also a lot of studies showing specific diet and food options that can really increase the ability to lose this visceral fat, and exercises that can really target that specific situation. Because remember, just losing weight alone is not always going to take care of these visceral and ectopic fat options. So I hope this video helps you understand some of the harm that can come about from having this wrong type of body fat going on. And if you want to check out the steps that science is showing us the fastest way to reduce this visceral fat, as soon as our video for the easiest plan to reduce visceral fat is available, I think it comes out tomorrow, we'll put a link right here. I can't wait to hear about your results.